Hashem, we are continuing with the laws of Shabbos. You're not allowed to, we're discussing the prohibition of cooking. You can't, there's a big chapter on cooking, a big chapter on cooking. So he says, you're not allowed to wash your entire body or your greater part of your body with hot water, even if the water was heated before Shabbos, because there's the concern that somebody is going to come and heat it on Shabbos. This is forbidden even if you do not wash your body all at once, but only a part of the body at a time. So washing the entire body or the greater part of the body with hot water is prohibited on Shabbos. The degree of heat is not yad soledepo, rather hot water is what's generally considered to be a hot water. You can wash your hands, face, or other individual parts of the body, even with hot water, if it was heated in a permissible manner or before Shabbos. In washing the hair or the beard, you should take care not to squeeze out the water. While it is not prohibited, the common practice is to refrain from showering or bathing in cold or lukewarm water as well, unless you're experiencing great discomfort, as on a very hot day. In view of the certain complications and prohibitions involved, the prevailing custom is not to bathe in a pool or a lake or a river or the ocean. Swimming, whether in a pool or a body of water, is not permitted. However, a woman can go into the mikvah, and a man, according to some authorities, may likewise immerse himself in a mikvah on Shabbos morning. The water in the mikvah should be lukewarm, and you should be careful to avoid squeezing water out of your hair. When bathing or showering is permissible, it is advisable to wear a nylon rubber shower cap, but never in the mikvah. Okay, so we have seen in other malachot that Chazal prohibited many general areas of activity in order to separate Jews from activities that may lead to violations of Shabbos. For example, in order to protect the malacha of reaping, Chazal prohibited all interactions with trees. Similarly, to protect the malacha of grinding, Chazal prescribed taking medicine. It's obvious with regard to the malacha of cooking that no such prohibitions were practical, as much of Shabbos observance centers around food. Therefore, in place of wholesale prohibitions, Chazal instituted a number of safeguards whose purpose is to help us balance our handling of hot food without coming close to violating the malacha. These safeguards are called shehiyah, which regulates what food you can leave on a fire before Shabbos. Chazara, which regulates the conditions which you can return food, and hatmana, which is basically insulating. So now he's going to go through all of these categories. It's going to get a little tricky, very complex, but it's important to know. Very important to know these laws. So I'm just wondering, really, if it makes sense to do this in this context, because it could get a little complex, but okay, we'll go for it. So a pot which is on a fire is called a kli rishon. This is a pot which is on the fire. The pot is considered a kli rishon and capable of cooking, even if after it is removed from the fire, as long as it retains the heat, so that it's yad soledepo, which we said was 120 degrees. You're therefore prohibited from putting anything that's subject to cooking into a kli rishon. You are also prohibited from pouring from a kli rishon. That's called iroi kli rishon, onto something that is subject to cooking, because pouring has the effect of cooking the surface or the outer layer. There are a lot of footnotes here. Putting salt and sugar into a pot on the fire. Despite salt and sugars already having been boiled, you can't put it into a pot of soup or cholent that's on the fire or even off the fire if it's yad soledet. First, you should pour the soup or cholent into a secondary kli, a kli sheni, and then add the salt and sugar. If you did put it in, you're allowed to eat the food. Warming a baby bottle in hot water. You can pour hot water onto a baby bottle containing milk or a container of soup or baby food in order to warm it. However, you can't warm up a baby bottle by placing it in hot water in a kli rishon if the contents will be heated to the degrees of Yad Seledepo. You may warm it by placing it in a kli sheni containing hot water, even if it's Yad Seledepo, as the kli sheni will not maintain the heat necessary to cook the contents of the bottle. Pouring hot soup onto bread. You should not pour hot soup directly from the pot in which it was cooked onto pieces of bread or matzah. You should pour the soup first into the bowl, and after it has cooled somewhat, add the bread or matzah. So you can add bread to your soup, but you have to wait for it to cool. The more common solution is to remove the soup from the pot with a spoon and add the bread or matzah immediately, since the bowl will have the status of a kli shlishi. That's what he's saying to do. If you remove it with the ladle, you don't pour it directly from the soup pot, obviously, into your bowl. You move it with a ladle. The ladle is a kli sheni, and then you put the bread into the bowl because then it's a kli shlishi. Not everybody agrees with this concept called kli shlishi, but that's what he says. Pouring hot water onto instant coffee and tea. These are complicated areas and very complex, and we're just saying what his opinion is. I mean, not just his opinion, but there's a lot of different opinions, is what I mean to say. So he says you should not pour boiling hot water from a kli rishon onto instant coffee or tea. Incidentally, I should mention that our yeshiva just bought today a fancy new urn, and it has 3 settings: whole, weekday, Shabbas, and Yom Tif settings. They have 3 settings, just so you know. So, and it's because the old urn, it was very hard to get the water out, so we got a new one. You should not pour boiling water onto instant coffee or tea, although they have been pre-cooked and dried in the process of production. They should be added after the water is first poured into a cup. Some advise the use of a kli shlishi, that is pouring the hot water from the urn into a mug and then into a second mug. The above ruling applies as well to other similar products, such as, so he says you could use a kli shlishi. He says that. I remember when I studied this with Rabbi Willig, he said no such thing as kli shlishi, but others, Moshe Feinstein said you could. But anyway, so he says you could use a third utensil, which is basically pouring the hot water from the urn into a mug, and then you pour the mug into a second mug, and then you could add your tea bag and your coffee. The above ruling applies as well to other products like milk powder, soup powder, instant cocoa, and spices. Making tea on Shabbos. That was instant tea. But in making tea on Shabbos, you're not permitted to pour hot water from a kettle that was on a fire or from an urn onto tea leaves, or to place a tea bag into hot water, either in a kli rishon or even kli sheni. There are 2 methods to make the tea. The first is to cook the tea leaves or pour hot water over them before Shabbos. Then on Shabbos, you can put the liquid tea essence into hot water you poured from the kettle into a kli sheni. If the tea essence is kept warm on the block, you can put it into a cup and pour hot water on it from the kettle. If you did not prepare tea essence before Shabbos, some permit making the essence on Shabbos by putting a tea bag into cold or lukewarm water. Also, some permit using a tea bag without essence, as long as you place the bag into a kli shlishi. It's a very complicated, it's a lot of dispute about it, but basically there are 2 ways to make the tea on Shabbos, either by using essence, and you're pouring boiling hot water into the essence, or else, or else what you could do is you could use Kli Shlishi. Kli Shlishi is controversial, like I said, but he says that some say it's okay. We're on page 138 of this book. Well, first we're just going to study this book for another 2 minutes, and then we're going to go to the Chumash and Rashi. I also want to mention, I'll say this in 2 minutes. A pot that was not on the fire into which food or liquid is transferred from a Kli Rishon is called a Kli Sheni. What? 138. We're discussing the laws of cooking on Shabbos, which are very complex and difficult. So now we're up to what's called a Kli Sheni. A Kli Sheni is the secondary utensil. Well, I'm very confused, Aryeh, that you're not sitting at the front. Wow, so geschmack. Okay, so a pot that was not on the fire into which food or liquid is transferred from Kli Rishon is called a Kli Sheni. So basically, you take something off the fire and you pour it into another pot. That makes that thing a secondary utensil. Halacha says you can't cook in a Kli Sheni, even when it's Yad Tzoledipa, which is 120 degrees. But there are some foods that are called Kalei Abishol, that they cook easily, like tea leaves, which would also cook in a Kli Sheni. Since it's difficult to determine exactly which foods fall into this category, you should not put any uncooked food into a Kli Sheni when the Kli is still hot enough to be Yad Tzoledipa. I'm sorry? You're not allowed to put something in the coconut water. So that's if you're dealing with something that's already cooked, but something that's not cooked yet, like tea leaves, called Kalei Abishol, then we said that you shouldn't do in a Kli Sheni. So how do you cook that? So we just discussed that there are 2 ways to do it. One is, and the way everybody says okay, is to make tea essence, where basically you steep the tea in water before Shabbos and make like a highly concentrated tea essence. And then on Shabbos, you could pour some water from the kettle into a cup and then just add the tea essence into it. That's okay according to everyone. And they sell tea essence in a lot of kosher supermarkets for like way overpriced, because you're basically just putting tea bags in water. Or the alternative way, which is more controversial, is to use a Kli Shlishi. Not everybody says a Kli Shlishi is sufficient, because not everybody accepts it, because it's not mentioned in the earlier sources. Kli Shlishi is you pour from the urn into a cup. So that first cup is now a Kli Sheni. You pour it into a second cup. That's a third cup. That's called the Kli Shlishi. That's a third utensil. And then from this third utensil, but the problem is, then there's also debate. If the urn is the urn considered like the first cup a Kli Rishon that it pours into? Maybe the first cup it gets straight from the urn is a Kli Rishon. Anyway, that's a different dispute. But anyway, the point is, Kli Shlishi is okay according to some, but not everybody accepts that. So that's why this is a dispute. Yeah. Okay, let's stop here. We'll go to the Rashi. I want to mention something that